Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and one of my trays, the one right here behind me, the white tray, it's got European night crawlers in it, and for the past 6 days I've been trying to encourage the worms to move out of the finished castings. It's a process that I've given the name horizontal migration, because basically you're just trying to get the worms to move horizontally across the surface of the container from the side that's got the finished castings in it over into another side of the container where you've set up a nice comfortable section. It's the section that you see right here in this tray with the red plastic covering. It's the only portion of the tray that's covered with plastic. The rest is all covered with paper. The whole idea is there that the paper side is allowing for moisture to evaporate out. It's only under the plastic where the moisture is circulating. And under the plastic is also the only spot in the bin where there's fresh bedding, fresh food, and the whole idea is that on their own accord the worms are going to move out. So now it was 6 days ago that I went in here and I set this up this way, and it's not really ready yet, I don't think, for a haul out of worms yet. For that matter, I don't even really have a place to put them yet. I just wanted to make sure that, number one, there's ample food in here to make sure that the process continues. And after 6 days, it might require a little replenishment of food, but I'm sure there's still stuff in there to keep drawing the worms in. The other thing I like to do once in a while this process is happening is to till up the material that I'm trying to encourage the drying off in. So I want to stir that up a little bit, kind of help it aerate so that it can, hopefully kick off some of its moisture a little bit more readily. So I'm going to get this up on the bench. I'll throw a glove on, and we're going to first of all check out the material, give it a good stir, and if need be, maybe even add a little bit of fresh food in here. And at the same time, hopefully we'll see how many worms have made their way over here versus how many worms are still requiring the a little bit of extra time to get out of the finished castings. So let's get to work. Alright, got the glove on, we're ready to go. So let's see, the top layer is the plastic. Plastic job is just to create that little bit of a terrarium effect of recycling moisture. The moisture in here would otherwise just go into the air and evaporate and be gone. So we want to keep that moisture down where we want the worms to be drawn to, since moisture is such a key, vital piece of their ability to breathe. Since without moisture, they're not going to be able to breathe through their skin, and naturally they're drawn to the more damp places. And that extra dampness appears to have also encouraged the growth of some little bits of mold, from what I can tell, here and there in certain places. I think I even saw some growing right here on the paper. Generally, I don't think that's really a problem. I think mold is just one of the contributors to the breakdown process of materials in your bin. So my setup here, if you haven't been on my channel before, if this is like your first exposure to my method, I've typically got this little kind of cardboard wall placed in between where my finished compost is and where the baiting area is, but I do punch the cardboard full of tiny holes so that getting through it is very easy for the worms. The baiting area, or the feeding area, whatever you want to refer to it as, is usually made up of pretty large chunks of paper and cardboard, things that would be easy enough to just pull out and shake a little bit just to dislodge any stuff stuck to it, including worms, so as to be able to quickly separate any worms that have gathered here from the materials that make up that side. The only exclusion would be the foods that are used in there, which, might be going to mush at this point or whatever the case may be. We'll take a quick look in there too to see how many worms have come together and whether we need to add some food. Let's first check out how this material is coming along. So, as you would imagine, if this is the area that's meant to draw worms, the area right here on this edge, especially this damp section, is probably where we're going to expect to see the greatest number of worms. Presumably on their way over here, just not having made it there quite yet. You can see right away we don't have to go very far. They're pretty close to the surface. There's tons and tons of worms in here. It makes me really wonder sometimes about my estimate of 500 worms, or at least my spreadsheet says that that's the amount of worms that I started this population with. And I mean, over, numerous months, it is possible that they've expanded their numbers and increased their population. But if, every handful of material has a whole bunch of worms in it, and who knows how many over here, I would guess that we're probably well over 500 in here. Either they've really grown quickly or my original estimation was really off. But, everywhere you look, there's always a little tiny baby worm somewhere, fairly juvenile worms everywhere, as well as cocoons, pretty readily visible most of the time too. So, they're evidently comfortable enough to be reproducing and expanding their population. Usually the stuff that I'm kind of stirring up over here is the stuff that I don't really want to, I don't know, I guess the whole idea is to not distance the worms from being so close to where you really want them ultimately. But if the material is this damp, and it is quite damp, I really feel it is necessary to try to till it up so that it has a chance to dry out a little bit. Maybe the repositioning of the plastic should also be a little closer to the edge where the food and the baiting area is, allowing more of this stuff out on this side to dry a little bit more. As it dries, it's going to become less and less of an appealing place for the worms to remain in. Hopefully sort of driving them towards sort of a kind of a migrating behavior. So this stuff is tilled up pretty good. A lot of the stuff down here on the very bottom is just completely drenched. It almost makes me wonder if this system would benefit from having the fan blowing across the top of it for a few days, which would help a lot with the evaporation of the moisture out of the system. I've had systems that were really overly damp and just operated the little tiny fan that I have, gently blowing air across the surface of this from a pretty good distance, maybe from 5 feet away or more, just to create that gentle airflow. It definitely helps speed along the drying out process of the material in the system. And that might be exactly what this system needs. I believe that that's exactly what I'm going to do, is I'm going to try to encourage drying in here a little bit more quickly than we're observing, and then maybe we'll have some slightly better material. This stuff is like mud. I remember when I first started seeing the cocoons, the worm cocoons, they're just so, they almost look like a little itsy bitsy tiny tomato or something when they're still freshly deposited into the system with this really light color. And then over time they darken as they approach the point in time when the worms can emerge from them, the little baby worms. One of these days I've got to get that information straight in my head. I've always been under the impression that multiple baby worms emerge from a single worm cocoon, but it varies from breed to breed. So I somehow had this sense that when it comes to red wigglers, you get a whole lot of baby worms coming out of a single cocoon. And maybe with these worms, which are the European night crawlers, you might have a slightly different number of worms that emerge from a single cocoon, or whatever the case may be. I don't remember, because I don't think it's just a one-size-fits-all kind of figure. It is a varying number depending on what type of worm cocoon you're talking about. So, as long as the stuff is this damp too, right? The worms are never going to want to leave it. It's so nice and cozy and moist, and if it starts to dry, definitely you're going to get some worms wanting to get the heck out of there. But as long as it's this moist, the worms are just going to stay put. They're not going to go anywhere. And I'm sure some of them are eventually making their way over to where the feeding area is. But it does seem like we've also got quite a few that are just still hanging out back here in the material. I'm glad I'm doing this, because geez, stuff is so damp. You'll never complete the process this way. Lately I've been trying to sort of stage the different key elements that really maximize the progress of one of these horizontal migrations. So I've been trying to, you know, before I sort of decide to go to that stage of, now I'm trying to set up one side of the bin to lure all the worms out. I'm now trying to depopulate the finished castings. I'll try to, number one, let the castings dry a little bit, which is something that was not accomplished here, obviously. These castings are quite damp. That was the whole idea of having only a piece of paper covering them, because that would allow for a good amount of airflow, a good amount of moisture to just be shed off the top surface. But when I run the fan, there's nothing covering the material. It's just exposed to the air so that the evaporation can just happen unobstructed, and that the moving air can really aid in that happening pretty quickly. So that's definitely what's happening next here. So I've just tried to, stir up the material, not pat it back down, not try to squish it back down. I like the little air pockets everywhere that resulted from me sort of tilling all the material around. And I mean, yeah, you could tell it's really damp. It's all sticking together. But just based on the fact that it's not really adhering to my gloves so much tells me, and I didn't really see any pooling on. I saw good heavy dampness at the bottom, but I didn't see any pooling down there. So I think those would be the indicators that things have indeed gone over the top in terms of being too damp. Here we've got, fairly damp, but not overly damp. It's about the right, not the right moisture, but a good moisture level. Not like mud, But you definitely want it more crumbly, that's for sure. So here we're not extracting worms. We're just taking a peek, trying to decide if we need to apply more food to this area. I'm assuming that most of the stuff sprinkled on top is the coffee that I built this with. It does not resemble castings, definitely resembles coffee. Maybe it's the coffee that's causing the moldiness. Geez, I don't even know what this is. I'm trying to remember what I fed with. I might have fed with this really pulverized, chopped up material. Oh, what is this? Jeez. I don't really even know. I can't really hardly remember what I built this feeding area out of, but I'm definitely not seeing the kind of turnout that I was sort of hoping for, at least not yet. Maybe this stuff in here just isn't quite as interesting as it could be. Like this too, this moldiness down low it's weird. I guess it must suck all the nearby moisture into itself, because it usually is kind of, I don't know, a little bit dry almost. And I guess that's just the way mold works, right? It needs to be sort of disturbed, and then it becomes airborne. The little spores start making their way around, and then that's how it gets from one place to another. But I'm definitely getting this sense here that we're going to add more stuff, and we're going to try to put stuff in here that's got a greater attractiveness, if you will. I think, something that's going to actually get these worms to come on over. Maybe I'm just in here too soon, Maybe 6 days just isn't enough time yet to expect many worms to have gathered here. So I'm going to take a break right now. I need to run upstairs to get ourselves some fresh bait to use in here. So we'll resume this in a few minutes once I'm ready to reload. As you can see, the selection of stuff here is only a few different items. I mean, I don't have a lot of room. Clearly you've got some tomato and some banana. Over here you've got also some extra stuff stuck within the frozen into the tomato. A couple pieces of asparagus, I believe, maybe even a chunk of cucumber. I wonder if I can grab my little pocket knife and maybe cut some of these in half, make them a little bit smaller just so they'll fit down here more easily. And something that you don't see me adding very often, but I figured, you know what, let's really up the ante over here, and let's increase a whole bunch of moisture into this stuff too. So on top I'm going to just rest a couple of these pieces of ice on top of these pieces of paper right here once we cover everything up. It'll hopefully just gradually soak into this stuff and really jack up the moisture level over here. So let's, oh, one other thing. It's the used coffee filter bedding supplement. We'll start with this. We'll throw this right in the bottom. So we got a couple worms already hanging out here down at the bottom. Let's see, perhaps a few chunks of banana to start with. These are all fairly large chunks of stuff. If we were picking through this, we'd be able to pull all these things out. Hopefully end up with just a pile of worms, but not a lot of worms yet. With my pocket knife, I was able to pretty easily hack this piece of tomato in half. And there we go. It is a piece of cucumber stuck in the inside of it. I would think all this stuff is going to be pretty favorable for the worms. All stuff that's just swimming in moisture content, I believe. As it all starts to thaw out, as it starts to break down gradually, it's going to really become a nice cozy spot that the worms are going to want to gravitate towards. Chipped off pretty easily. I guess when you're dealing with frozen veggies, it's more like a, it just doesn't have the original consistency. It's more like a block of ice. Handling it like a block of ice. Oh, we got so much more stuff here. I was kind of careful to all lay it in there pretty equally, but I guess we can continue. Give this another piece of tomato right in the middle, which is the only spot where it's not been applied yet. We've even got another piece. So, a whole lot of tomato in here. People are probably going to start questioning, hey, isn't that really acidic? Isn't there like high acid content in tomatoes? And, you know, I don't know, maybe. I'm more interested in the moisture content, and they do always seem to come for the tomatoes, so even if there's acid in there, it must be something that they can tolerate pretty easily. Well, other than their ice cubes, we've got a little bit of banana remaining here. Trying to stick all this stuff up against the back wall, so to speak, right? Have them have to come through all the more heavily broken down stuff to get at the fresh stuff, which will probably end up causing them to just remain in the more broken down stuff, since it's hopefully more easy to eat, or at least I assume so. Maybe not. Maybe there's really not much for them to eat in there. Maybe that's why this isn't working quite as good as it could be. Well, I'm glad I checked in. You know, I usually don't check in that early. Usually I want to let this process run for a while. So it does seem to be a good thing that we did check in here today, because it really didn't seem very active. I'm glad we added this more kind of alluring bait. We've also kind of increased the size of the baiting area at this point from the look of it. We're also going to jack up the moisture content in here by putting a couple time release moisture modules in. My technical name for ice cubes. Alright, so what else do we have to do here? Not much, just get things covered up again and let the process continue. But basically that means we're going to not be covering up over here anymore, so leaving this thing kind of folded in half probably makes good sense. Allowing it to continue covering things up where we need it to, and maybe not so much where we want to ventilate. Here too, try to focus the recirculation to occur over here on the edge. Out here we can get drying to happen. Might need paperweights too if I get some air moving over here. I don't want this thing to blow away, so whatever. I'll tinker away with this in a little while. But for now I think we're done. We've pretty much taken care of everything that I wanted to. But before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. Also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.